Now that we have Webpack installed, let's begin configuring it. It's pretty simple. You need to create a file named webpack.config.js. When we run Webpack, Webpack will look for this file and use it. This file will contain the settings for Webpack and you can modify how it behaves through it. I'm going to create a variable named config, which will be set to an empty object. Then I'm going to export it. There are two properties required. If we don't define anything, then Webpack will throw an error. The first property is entry. I'm going to set this to ./app/index.js. This folder and file doesn't exist, so we'll create those two now. Inside the index file, I'm going to log a message. It's important to note that you can name this file whatever you want. Alright, let's go back to the Webpack config file. The next property we have to set is the output property, which contains the settings to where the final file will be saved. This will be an object, and there are two properties we have to set, which are the path and file name properties. The file name property can be set to whatever you want. If you view the documentation or read any tutorials, most developers name this bundle.js. We'll follow this naming convention. The path property is a bit tricky. This will be the name of the directory where the bundle.js file will be saved. However, you must input a full system path. You can't just put a relative path as you'll receive an error. Luckily, Node provides some functions for helping us generate a full system path. We don't have to guess and input some random directory. I'm going to create a new variable at the top called path and set its value to the module path. The path module is a default Node module that helps you with generating paths in your system. This module will return an object with a couple of methods we can use. I'm going to use this object and call the resolve method. This method will return a string of an absolute directory. The great thing about this module is that it's cross-compatible. This code will work on any operating systems such as Windows, OS X, and Linux. This method has an unlimited number of parameters. You just pass in the name of the directories you'd like to have. I'm going to pass in the constant __dir name. This is a constant created by Node for you automatically. It contains the path to the current file it's being used in. I'm going to then pass in dist. This can be named whatever you want. This will return a path to our current directory and point to a folder called dist, which is short for distribution. In a lot of tutorials and examples, you'll find that most developers will name it this. Some developers will also name it build, which is perfectly fine. It's all preference. In the end, Webpack will look at this and create a file named bundle.js that contains all our JavaScript code and save it in our current directory inside a folder named dist. This is the minimum requirements for configuring Webpack. There are more settings we can set, but we'll get to those later. In order for this to work, we need to install another module. The Webpack module is what takes care of processing everything. In order for Webpack to process everything, we need to write the code for it. We've only configured it. Fortunately, there is a tool that takes care of that for us. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to the official Webpack CLI. Node allows you to create your own custom commands, and there are modules that take advantage of that feature, Webpack being one of them. With this tool, we can allow Webpack to take care of making it process the code itself. Back inside the command line, input the commands npm I webpack-cli-save-dev. I'm introducing a new subcommand here called I, which is short for install. There's no difference between the two. The I is just the shorthand version. Run this command. It may take a while to install, so be patient. The last step is to have npm run the command. Open the package.json file. Under the scripts property, we can have npm run the commands for us rather than typing it ourselves. Create a new property called start. You can name this whatever you want, but I recommend keeping it short and concise. The value for this will be the command you want to run. I'm going to input the following: webpack --config webpack.config.js. The Webpack command was provided to us when we installed Webpack CLI module. This command requires us to set the option config. This option will tell Webpack what file contains our configuration settings. Then you simply pass in the file name. In our case, this would be webpack.config.js. That's all we need to do. Now we can run this command. Inside the command line, input npm run start. This will tell npm to run the command inside the scripts property called start. After running this command, you'll see a couple of stuff being outputted. You'll be provided with the amount of time it took to run this command. It's fairly fast. For me, it took under a second. You'll also be provided with the name of the file that contains all your code and the files that are saved inside this file. We only have one file, and that's the index.js file. One thing I want you to notice is the size of both files. The index file is only a few bytes. However, the bundle.js file is way larger than the index file. The jump in size is massive. So why is this? Well, let's check out the bundle.js file for more answers. After running this command, Webpack should create a directory called dist with the bundle.js file saved inside. Let's open this file. It's safe to do so. Webpack generates a lot of code. There's a lot going on here. It can be very intimidating, but it's nothing you have to worry about. Webpack is just making sure the code works without a problem. In future lectures, we'll definitely benefit from this optimization. If you scroll around, you'll eventually find the message that we logged in our file. At first glance, this seems excessive just for one line of code, and you're completely right. If you're using Webpack for small projects, then you really don't need it. Webpack is for larger projects like single-page apps. I promise we'll use Webpack in a larger project, but for now, we'll keep it to this simple example. Let's check if this works. The file that Webpack generates is meant to be used on the front end. I'm going to create a file called index.html, and inside this HTML file, I'm just going to load the bundle.js file. Then, I'm going to simply open up the index.html file. This is just a simple HTML file, so we don't need any servers or backend logic to help us. Open up the console and you'll see the message hello being outputted. The real power of Webpack comes into play when we start using multiple modules. Before I end this lecture, let's go back to the terminal. If you were to look at the message outputted, you'll see that Webpack tells us we should set the mode. Let's add this to the config file and set it to development. There are two possible values for this, which are production and development. I believe it's obvious which setting you should use. Since we're on our local machines, then this should be set to development. Once you upload your code to a live server, be sure to set this to production. Webpack uses this to optimize the code depending on where the code will be used. The development mode will output more messages to help you debug your script. Now that we've set that, let's move on to the next lecture.